My guest today is Jagan Chapagain, the Secretary General of IFRC. Welcome.
Thank you.
And it's great talking to you today, this year, from the UNGA 79 in New York. We're recording this special episode in New York. And I remember just about a year ago when we started with this podcast, we recorded it in Geneva just before you went to the GA. So now we're doing it right here in the middle of it. And it's literally in the middle. So if I may, let me start with a very general question. You've finished 2-3 days of meetings, events, activities with high-level officials, representatives of member states, UN member states, as well as international organizations. You have given some interviews to the media. What has been your main message that you and the IFRC are bringing or brought to the United Nations General Assembly this year?
It's good to have it here now from New York and from our brand new IFRC office here in New York. So
Indeed.
It's fantastic. This year, the UNGA is happening in a context of massive global polarization and the world facing multiple conflicts on top of course, the climate crisis, the health crisis, the migration crisis. And an event like this, of course, tries to cover multiple issues. And we have been contributing to many of these issues in different forums and events. But one of the key messages we, as an IFRC, try to bring spotlight onto has been safety and protection of local humanitarian actors, staff and volunteers, of course, the IFRC network, our National Red Cross and Red Crescent societies, but also many other humanitarian organizations. And this is what we have done in multiple events, but also in our interviews, in our bilateral discussion, but also in plenary forums. And this has become critically important because 2024 is becoming the worst year for humanitarians. Even just within the Red Cross Red Crescent, we lost more than 30 volunteers and staff on line of duty when they were wearing the Red Cross Red Crescent emblem, the vest.
Just this year.
Just this year. And in Red Cross Red Crescent uniform. Geneva Convention offers protection to these emblems. And this erosion of respect on the emblems like the Red Cross Red Crescent and the killing of humanitarians is a very, very serious escalation. And that's what we really tried to bring into this UNGA. And within that, we are focusing particularly on the local humanitarian actors. But the statistics show for the last 10 years has been that more than 95% of the humanitarians killed have been the local staff or local volunteers. And the global media or the political attention, the ratio is 1 to 500. If something happens to international, it receives 500 times more attention than something happens to locals. And this also has to change. The humanitarians are humanitarians. Human life is human life. And that's the message we are pushing here during this UNGA, but this will require a sustained campaign.
Do you think the leaders who have gathered here, who are still here at the UNGA in New York, do you think they can do anything about it? What role do they play in that?
The engagement have been largely positive. I have found people listening this issue with the seriousness it deserves. Now, listening is one thing, but acting on that is different thing. We do believe that particularly the governments can make a difference because the party to the conflict do have relationship with different governments in the world. and some of them much closer. Some of them are dependent on some of this government for the economic assistance, and in many cases, even the military assistance. Now, if the government makes the determination that things need to change, they can absolutely engage in persuasion, and if necessary, they can influence by also taking actions which compels the parties of conflict to change their behavior. So I absolutely believe that the government have a significant role to play. Beyond that, of course, the general public. And here I really want to highlight that the media can play a significant role. Again, the statistics we had was in Gaza, when the internationals got killed, they got 25,000 articles covering that. And in a very similarly awful incident, when 4 of the Palestinian Red Crescent volunteers and staff got killed, it received only 50 articles. And that was also mostly from the local and regional news organizations. So the media can play a huge role to fill this gap.
This is also the plea that you made to the journalists yesterday during the press briefing. And I had an impression that they heard you. They really were interested in doing their part.
Absolutely.
So I certainly hope that we'll see more articles in the future when these things do happen. If I may move to talking a little bit about the conflict in Israel and Palestine. As we know, we are witnessing a really tremendous humanitarian catastrophe unfolding. Do you see any hope or any indication that this humanitarian situation can improve?
In a situation like this, it's critically important that the hope is kept alive. Now, and the other word you used was, are there indications? At the moment, unfortunately, there are not. The conflict is escalating further. The parties that could make a difference are not sitting on dialogue. Of course, there have been multiple third-party convened discussions. They haven't produced any significant outcome. And the recent escalation in Lebanon, unfortunately, doesn't indicate that we are heading towards some sort of resolution here. Mm-hmm. Now, can this change? I believe it can. Of course, the ultimate outcome should be the cessation of hostilities. And as we have seen, all the conflict have ended on the negotiating table. And so there will have to be a discussion at some point to result on the cessation of hostilities. Until then, there are things that can already be done. There are many land routes to get the humanitarian assistance into the country. They haven't been opened. They haven't been made available. If the Geneva Conventions is respected by all parties to the conflict, clearly that facilitates the work of the humanitarian organizations like the Red Cross, Red Crescent. There can be more observance of the deconfliction arrangements. Some of them have been put in place. So even before the cessation of the hostilities, although cessation should be the ultimate objective, things could be improved if there is the willingness on the party to the conflict to make a difference. Here, I also have to emphasize the point that the hostages, as long as they are in captivity, it also keeps an issue alive, a very, very humanitarian issue alive, that these hostages being kept in captivity almost a year now. So that is also an important element to be resolved before.
Did you see any indication here, well, this week in New York, that there is a political will to resolve the problem?
If I'm brutally honest, I did not see that. Of course, there are discussions and there are
Yes.
some pretty strong statements. In a situation like this, when it's gone for almost a year, the statement is no longer enough.
Mm-hmm.
The concrete actions that could be taken needs to be taken right now. Of course, I don't want to underestimate the value and power of debates and discussion in a forum like UNGA. Clearly, in an environment where the parties to the conflict cannot sit on a negotiating table, the UNGA absolutely provides that platform. So I in no way underestimate the power and value of this type of platform. But what we haven't seen is those dialogue translating into a concrete measures on the ground.
Yes.
And that is the crux of the matter. And okay, we are still just halfway. I haven't seen that yet.
Another unfortunately similar situation, a huge humanitarian disaster, one might call it, is happening in Sudan. And I know that you participated in an event just today. And we also heard lots of statements and even commitments from leaders and governments. And you also made a statement to the leaders there. What is your message on that situation?
The Sudan situation has been, from the humanitarian perspective, as bad as it can get. But it's simply not getting the type of attention it deserves and the type of investment to get the humanitarian activities going. It's simply not getting there. I participated in exactly the same event 1 year ago. And the focus of that event last year was, how to address the inaction in Sudan. And after 12 months, we did exactly the same thing today. And that was, I think, very frustrating for many humanitarians like myself. Again, the crisis like what we have seen in Sudan, unfortunately, the parties to the conflict are not able to come together to have a serious dialogue to end it. So that means the situation does require the international players, particularly the governments and the multilateral forums that exist in the world, to help the parties to come together and frankly push the parties to come together. Until and unless that happens, Sudan is geopolitically in a very critical location. It's a large country. And if this continues, of course, the Sudanese people are suffering. The infrastructure is damaged immensely. But it will have a wider impact in the region, both from the humanitarian point of view, but also from the security and the economics point of view. So it will have a much broader implication. So clearly there were some positive statements that came out today from a number of states. And I made very clear in my statement that these statements now has to be turned into a concrete action from the states who can make a difference. Otherwise, 12 months next year, we will be coming and talking exactly the same issues, which would be a huge injustice to people of Sudan.
And probably, in the meantime, a huge loss of life.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Lives and livelihoods.
Yes. So now from the UN General Assembly, I'd like to look to the future, to next month, actually. So next month, the Red Cross Red Crescent movement is convening its statutory meetings. The General Assembly, which is only an IFRC event, followed by the Council of Delegates together with ICRC, and then international conference, which also brings in addition to ICRC, IFRC, national societies and member states. So what would you say is that opportunity? What kind of opportunity to influence governments and other stakeholders to work perhaps differently in the humanitarian field? What is your goal for that particular opportunity?
Of course, in the UN General Assembly, the scope is much broader, and the topics discussed are more political in nature. While the Red Cross Red Crescent movement conference would be purely focused on the humanitarian issues. And here, what we are really hoping is the states and our Red Cross Red Crescent national societies come to that platform with an absolute focused objective around how to change the humanitarian dynamics in the world. Starting with reinforcing the use and compliance of the international humanitarian law. Many of the challenges we talked about earlier, the killing of the humanitarian workers, for example, the access to the civilian populations, the protection to the civilian populations, these are all covered by the international humanitarian law. And unfortunate erosion on the respect to the international humanitarian law has resulted in a much worse humanitarian impact on the population. And I think the international conference is an incredible opportunity without politics, purely focusing on the humanitarian aspects of the population. And we are hoping to build a momentum through this international conference to bring that unity that is required to address the growing humanitarian challenges in the world. Of course, beyond the IHL, we do have multiple other topics that focuses on strengthening our humanitarian and development action at the community level, strengthening community resilience, strengthening anticipatory action so that we can reduce the loss of lives and livelihoods, and strengthening overall the humanitarian ecosystem through the Red Cross Red Crescent movement.
You mentioned earlier polarization in the different areas of our work. And the overall theme of the statutory meetings or the international conference is humanity in a polarized world. Why do you think this polarization is having such a profound impact? And what can we do about it? Perhaps beyond holding another meeting?
I think the polarization is a result of multiple global events. It's not happening from one incident. And that euphoria that existed at the end of the Cold War, unfortunately, was not capitalized by the global system to move to a next phase of global solidarity, especially on the humanitarian field. It's clearly fueled by multiple conflict that's happening, and the countries, of course, taking sides of the conflict. The erosion on the respect of international humanitarian law and sort of sense of impunity developed, that if you have the might, you can do whatever you like, type of the mindset that's sort of being developed here. Clearly, following the COVID-19, the economic hardships multiple countries experienced, and the very high rate of inflation and significantly lowered economic activities, of course, creates a pressure on the people and the communities and the countries, and the explosion on the use of the social media, which is being misused by certain sections in the communities to spread the misinformation and disinformation. And when that happens at a scale that's happening now, also fuels the polarization or exacerbates the polarization that is already existing. Now, unfortunately, when this happens, and even in my own lifetime, I have seen the global political leadership and the mechanism stepping up to come together to address some of these issues. And last couple of years, unfortunately, that's not happening. And this is really need of the hour, that the leadership have that courage and determination to step up from the things that's is pulling the world down.
If I may bring that positive attitude that I know you bring to your work every day and inspired in the rest of us, I'd like you to perhaps find that or tell us about that positive inspiration that you draw from. Where does it come from? If you can tell our listeners and viewers, why does the Red Cross, Red Crescent matter today?
When I joined the Red Cross Red Crescent as a young volunteer back in 82, 83, the relevance of the Red Cross Red Crescent that time towards the society. And that, once I joined, when I learned, that inspired me to continue that work. Now, if I fast forward more than 40 years, and when we see what's happening around the world, the conflict, the climate, the health, migration, the issues of exclusion, I feel the need for the Red Cross Red Crescent or organizations like us seems to be even more important, mainly because also of the polarization. And I think our fundamental principles, where we absolutely emphasize that anything that divides the human being should not be a determining factor on what we do as a Red Cross Red Crescent. That's the underlying principle of the Red Cross Red Crescent movement. And that becomes even more important. And the volunteers who are the backbone of the Red Cross Red Crescent, there's more than 16 million volunteers in the communities. That's been a huge source of inspiration for me, especially after I became the Secretary General when I had to deal with the COVID-19. And when I started seeing those numbers and statistics and the stories coming from the countries, that when the countries were going the route of lockdowns to prevent the spread of the COVID-19, but there were things you could not do remotely. Driving ambulances, looking after the patients in the hospitals, or taking the elderly to the hospitals, those activities you could not do remotely, unfortunately. And on an average, 1 million volunteers daily step forward. Mm-hmm. And if these 1 million volunteers could do that with absolute sense of social solidarity, that shows the humanity is kicking and alive, despite all the polarization. And I find that is my source of inspiration. So my message here is, yes, there are multiple crises. Yes, there are situations which we can give us a sense of frustration and frankly at times the hopelessness. But at the same time, there are so many instances of volunteers moving forward and keeping the humanity alive. And if we take that as a basis and push ahead, I think we can move the needle. And that's what is needed today.
Thank you, Jagan, for your thoughts at this critical time. And it was great catching up with you at UNGA. And
Thank you so
I
much.
will see you back in Geneva.
Thank you. Thank you, Sasha.